Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of Congress, clergy, welcome. My name is Rochelle Herman. Today, we have gathered here from all walks of life to express an overwhelming sense of grief for the loss of Leon Klinghoffer and our continued outrage at his murder by the PLO. We have come together to send our deepest sympathies to the Klinghoffer family, Marilyn, his daughters Ilsa and Lisa, and to his cousin, who is with us today, Mrs. Sharon Herman. It is only fitting that we meet here by the Capitol steps, where so many legislators are present. By assembling here, we send a clear message to our government that we will not be silent in the face of terrorism. If Leon Klinghoffer was not safe aboard the Achille Lauro, then no American can count himself safe. We are tired of hearing prominent leaders and spokesmen soft-pedal terrorism by affording the terrorists more recognition than they deserve. And we applaud the administration's actions in this latest crisis to bring the murderers to justice. We fervently hope that these actions have turned the tide on terrorism. As we stand here today to mourn the loss of Leon Klinghoffer, we also remember and mourn the loss of Robert Steedham, William Buckley, 200 United States Marines, and 5 other Americans yet to be freed. We are immensely gratified to see so many of you here and that so many members of Congress have expressed their support for this gathering. We would like to hear from all of them, but time permits only 2, whom I'm sure will speak for their colleagues. I now call on Rabbi David Shudrick, former rabbi of a New York congregation, to address us. Rabbi Shudrick.
Thank you, Rochelle. I cannot help but be taken by the contrasts drawn in comparing the men and women of our American armed forces with those of the PLO and its factions. We have today in our country countless men and women, veterans of the wars we have fought, whose psyches are scarred for life. These veterans had no alternative in battle but to take human life in defense of their own lives. Today, so many years later, there are still veterans whose lives are marred, their psyches scarred, their minds and hearts overwhelmed, because they had to take human life in the heat of battle, amid the carnage and brutality of war. In contrast, the deliberate murder of 241 sleeping Marines in their quarters in Beirut by so-called Arab freedom fighters. The Marines' crime, guilty of being Americans. In contrast, the deliberate murder of Robert Steedham, an innocent passenger on the hijacked TWA flight, a helpless 19-year-old unarmed man, savagely beaten, carelessly shot, and then dumped out of the airplane. Mr. Steedham's crime, guilty of being an American. In contrast, William Buckley, held hostage for many months, permitted to become gaunt and frail, ultimately murdered at the pleasure of his Arab captors, his body now being held for ransom. The price, the release of 6 other murderers from prison. Mr. Buckley's crime, guilty of being an American. Leon Klinghoffer was guilty. He was tried and found guilty on 2 capital counts. He was adjudged guilty of being an American and of being a Jew. For these 2 crimes, he was summarily murdered as he sat helpless in his wheelchair by 4 Arabs who had been indoctrinated from birth, trained by the allegedly moderate Mr. Arafat's PLO to find inner fulfillment and glory in murdering innocent, helpless people. Apparently, Mr. Klinghoffer's crime of being an American and a Jew was so ignoble, he was thrown into the sea together with his wheelchair, denied even in death the comfort, the warmth, the solace of the human touch. His wife, his friends of old, denied the basic human right to mourn, to touch, to hold him even in death. Leon Klinghoffer, a 69-year-old man, a person of dignity and purpose, a veteran of our American armed forces, having been brutally, senselessly murdered, was dumped into the sea, much as one would throw trash from the fantail of a ship. I offer you the contrast of the American way of life and death and that of Mr. Arafat's PLO and its factions. The unspeakable, heinous barbarism of these murderers bespeaks their credentials as pursuers of peace and justice. An ancient sage taught, if there is no justice, there is no peace. We, the American people, have now learned that as long as murderers are permitted to commit their atrocities with impunity, as long as they are permitted to remain beyond the reach of justice, we will continue to live under the ominous shadow of imminent tragedy. The Bible instructs us, justice, justice shalt thou pursue. The time has arrived that we must pursue that justice. We no longer have a choice.
Thank you, Rabbi Shulman.
As we gather here to mourn the death of Leon Klinghoffer, on the one hand, I guess one could look at it as a sort of purposeless and senseless kind of thing. But I think those, his family, his friends, and all of us who mourn his death can take some solace in the fact that it has not, after all, been pointless and senseless, because it has taught the world a lesson. People who shoot a helpless, unarmed old man in a wheelchair are not patriots, they're not heroes, they're not freedom fighters. They're just plain murderers, and brutal murderers at that. And already some of the world has started to learn that. The British government, which was about to receive 2 representatives of the PLO, has now rejected them, and I think we can take some solace in that fact. But I think we also have to recognize that there is a great international tragedy here, and that is that allegedly sovereign nations are being blackmailed into submission by what, as I've said, are simply a gang of murderers. The president of Egypt, aware of the ship hijacking crime and now apparently of the murder also of Mr. Klinghoffer, sets free the murderers. Why? Apparently his fear of PLO retaliation was greater than his desire for justice. President Sadat didn't act that way. The Italian government frees a PLO leader suspected of masterminding the hijacking. Why? Press reports indicate that the Italian government had made an arrangement with PLO leaders. You don't bother us, and we won't bother you. That's a startling, it's a tragic event for nations to surrender to terrorists. It's not only immoral, it's self-defeating. To make a pact with the devil is to lose control of your own destiny. Either nations adhere to the rule of justice, the rule of law, or they're going to become prisoners of terror. There is no hope of stopping international terrorism without the cooperation of all civilized nations. and stop it we must for the sake of citizens of all countries. We cannot continue to accept the killing of innocents like Leon Klinghoffer. We must create a counter-pressure to the terrorist blackmail. Let me deal particularly with the case of Egypt. Congress has been very generous to Egypt, but with the understanding that Egypt would contribute to peace in the Mideast. And permitting terrorists to go free is the antithesis of contributing to peace. As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I've asked the chairman of its Foreign Operations Subcommittee to amend our foreign aid bill, reducing aid to Egypt as that bill comes before the House. It's worth noting that the Appropriations Committee report on that bill recommends that the President deny funds to countries that fail to protect travelers. And the 1986 authorizing legislation, which authorizes more than $2 billion in military and economic aid to Egypt, includes the statement that it is, and I quote, "the sense of the Congress that all United States assistance to Egypt is provided in the expectation that Egypt will continue in its efforts to bring peace to the region." Failing to provide travelers security certainly is wrong, but even worse is giving terrorists the freedom to act again, to take the life of another Leon Klinghoffer. To fail to punish terrorism is to underwrite anarchy. The threat of reduced aid or whatever other disciplinary action the United States can take should make other countries think twice about permitting terrorists to roam free. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Green. I would also like to recognize the other congressmen that have joined us today. We have Representative Barbara McCluskey from Maryland and Representative Barbara Kennelly from Connecticut. And from New York, Senator Al D'Amato, who has been with the Klinghoffer family from the beginning. Senator D'Amato.
Thank you very much. And it really came as no surprise to us when we heard of a body that was found off the coast of Syria in the Mediterranean. Immediately, speculation was that this could very well indeed be the body of Leon Klinghoffer. Initial reports have indicated that it would appear to confirm those eyewitness accounts of the tragic, brutal murder of Mr. Klinghoffer. The body has bullet wounds, one in the chest area, one in the head. And so, with a degree of certainty and accuracy, we can probably say that it is Mr. Klinghoffer. What a shameful event. Not only the actual taking of that ship and its people and the manner in which they were held captive, subjected, particularly the Americans, to that indignation, culminating in the brutal murder of a paralyzed American, 69 years of age, in a wheelchair. But even as despicable, my friends, as reprehensible, as shameful a performance as I've ever seen was the performance of President Mubarak. Shame on you, Mr. Mubarak. Shame on your performance, on your statements, on your litany of mistruths right from the beginning, from the very beginning. And the gall and the irony to have a so-called ally, a leader of the Egyptian people, demand an apology from the United States. Mr. President, you are right in saying that we owe no apology to Egypt or to Mr. Mubarak, but indeed he owes an apology for the cowardice that he displayed. And I think it's most appropriate to ask a question, my friends. If this is the response of an ally to an area of concern that anyone would have responded to, I think even our enemies would have responded to with much more force and clarity and would have held those killers and would not have gone through the charade that Mubarak did. But to have an ally do this to us, in such a clear-cut area where there was no question as to what he should have done and responded? The question we have to ask is, what happens if the going really gets rough? What happens if we have a real situation that requires courage? What happens if there is military action in this area? Can we count on Egypt? Will there be the kind of leadership necessary to meet the challenges of the future? I fear not. Look to the facts, and the record is a sad one. And so, Mr. Mubarak, I think you have to say to the American people and come forward with your reasons for justifying our continued support to you in the tune of $2.3 billion annually, in attempting to give you the support that you receive, to bolster you. It hasn't done enough for his courage. My friends, the Anti-Terrorist Caucus of the Senate is circulating a letter right now in which we seek to have applied, brought into application, a provision under the Act to Combat International Terrorism that was passed October 19th of last year. That act authorizes the Secretary of State, with the concurrence of the Attorney General, to post a reward for the capture of terrorists. The maximum reward under that act can be $500,000. The co-founders of the Terrorism Caucus have joined with me in soliciting congressional support and asking Secretary Schultz to apply that legislative act and to put it into action and to offer that reward for Abbas, one of the great terrorists, and to rectify and to deal with that situation and to bring Mr. Abbas to justice. He should be brought to justice. I've received a communication from our president, and let me read it to the Klinghoffer family, to all those who are assembled here, to those who put together this service. Nancy and I want to express that we were greatly grieved to learn that Leon Klinghoffer had been slain by terrorists. As president, I know that our military operations aimed at bringing these brutal men to justice cannot relieve the anguish of his family and friends. Terrorism is one of the great tragedies of this world, and I demand that civilized people act to protect innocent travelers. Our prayers join with yours for the Klinghoffer family and for all who suffer terrorist oppression. Sincerely, Ronald Reagan.
Thank you, Senator D'Amato. I now call upon the distinguished family, Congressman Ted Weiss.
I've had occasion to spend time with Marilyn Klinghoffer and the Klinghoffer family. I was with them yesterday. Klinghoffer has demonstrated strength which is almost awesome, given the circumstances of her own hijacking, her presence aboard ship when her husband was so brutally slain. The one thing I think that has begun to emerge is that Marilyn Klinghoffer is going to use the opportunity that she now has to mobilize efforts to try to bring terrorism to an end throughout the world. The Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, under Yasser Arafat, has over these decades made the murder of men, women, and children, innocent civilians, as their regular mode of operation. And finally, the world, I think, with Leon Klinghoffer's murder, has come to see the horror of that kind of terrorist activity. The revulsion that's been demonstrated by countries around the world has never been witnessed before. Everyone, including Arafat, tried to distance himself from the killing, the slaying of Leon Klinghoffer. To try to put an end to terrorism once and for all. And that means terrorism in the Middle East and terrorism in Central America and terrorism in the United States itself. We cannot condone it no matter where it exists. And finally, although it is my sense that Egypt and Italy, through their leaders, have a great deal to apologize for in their conduct, we must not allow the PLO to gain as its final victory the tearing apart of the fabric of the alliance for peace which the United States has created. We must deny them that victory. And yes, we must insist that Egypt understand and accept the fact that we were within right. Indeed, it would have been complicity with evil for the president not to have ordered the action that he took. But we will not allow the PLO to remove Egypt from the force, from the nations which are pursuing peace, as we will not allow the PLO to remove Italy from among those nations which are pursuing peace. That, I think, is the last thing in the world that we would want to have happen. It's sad enough, tragic enough, that Leon Klinghoffer died in the awful circumstances that he did, that he was killed and murdered in that fashion. We must use his death for good and for constructive purposes.
Thank you, Congressman Weiss. New York, Senator Daniel Moynihan.
Well, good afternoon. I'd like to pursue just a moment, if I may, the theme that Representative Weiss just sounded about not giving the terrorists the victories that is their ultimate goal in the course of the immediate and ghastly events which they bring about. Terrorism can seem to be a very long way from us here on Capitol Hill on a lovely autumn day. But it was just 2 years ago, on November 7, that a bomb went off outside the lobby of the United States Senate. I happened to be leaving early that day to go up to New York to vote, and happened to be the first senator to get to the Capitol, and I went up, and it was really, it was a grim experience to realize that had we stayed in the night before, as we had expected, we would, there would some 15 senators would have died in that explosion. And I came out and said something not very elegant, but in the situation expressed what I thought, and I think what Ted Weiss was trying to say. I described to the press that we're trying to say, what was going on in the building, which was still sealed. And I said, well, told them what I'd seen. And I said, just remember one thing, they can bomb the Senate, but they can't blow up the democracy. And that is the most important thing, that the object of terrorism is to make us like the terrorists. And that is what, above all things, we have to resist. We are not animals, we are not cravens, we are not sadists, we are civilized and humane and God-fearing peoples. And above all, let us be rational. It would be the ultimate triumph of Yasser Arafat if the murder of Leon Klinghoffer were to bring about the disintegration of the basic elements of peace in the Middle East, which were established at Camp David in the accords between the United States and Israel and Egypt. And that mustn't happen. It must not be allowed to happen. It won't be allowed to happen. The president has made that clear. As for the 4 men who are in Italian custody, the Italian government has a record in these matters. It has faced terrorism on its own internally to a degree we have never known, and it has proven its capacity for justice. It has kept its courts open. It has kept its magistrates fearless. It's kept its verdicts honest. That will be our triumph. And that must be our understanding. The object of terrorism is to turn us into terrorists as well, and that will not happen. And in the memory of Leon Klinghoffer, let us resolve that that will not happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moynihan. Our last speaker from the Congress will be the distinguished senator from New Jersey, Senator Frank Lautenberg.
Thank you. I want to join in this tribute to Leon Klinghoffer and to declare this day that we shall fight terrorism from this free nation of ours, wherever it exists. I had an opportunity to visit with the two Klinghoffer daughters at Newark Airport when Mrs. Klinghoffer returned to the country, and we shared a view for a few minutes that Leon Klinghoffer's death, we hoped and prayed, shall not be in vain. For too long now, we've seen terrorism run rampant in region after region, country after country, with nothing more than words to fight back with. I've visited the Middle East many times, spent weeks visiting countries like Israel and Lebanon and so forth, and the ugliness of terrorism has somehow escaped us in this country. And all of us, whether in the government or outside, free citizens of this country, were revolted by what we saw was the humiliation of the world's great nation by a band of terrorists when they took our airplane some months ago, took it to Beirut, held our people captive, released them with us begging on our knees. And this time we had a chance to strike back. And I had an opportunity to appear on a television program with a representative of the Arab American League, or something similarly called, in which he denounced the United States for using terror tactics to capture the Egyptian airliner. And I remarked that I thought it was incredible that he was able to say those kinds of things in this free society of ours and condemn us and compare the taking of innocent people and the deprival of their rights and their lives to that of capturing murderers and thugs who would deprive people of their liberty. And he said we should not have taken that Egyptian airliner because it was tantamount to invading Egyptian soil, and that had to be respected at all times. And I reminded him that the PLO, which he so eloquently represented, had no reservations about going to Munich to wreak destruction, or London, or Rome, or any of the major capitals in Western Europe. My friends, I came by because I wanted an opportunity to join in those who are paying tribute to the memory of a brave person. As you read the details of this, it looks like despite his condition, he was determined to fight back, and they deprived him of his life so casually that Leon Klinghoffer's death shall mark a turning point in our resistance to terrorism. And the President's forthright action and his words comfort us to know that this free country will lead the fight against this type of activity. And I will join with my colleagues legislatively and in any way that we can to encourage this resistance and say, Leon Klinghoffer, we hope, will be the last to die at the hands of a terrorist. Thank you all.
Thank you, Senator. At this, Ms. Sharon Hellman will address us now.
We are all here today to honor the memory of my cousin, Leon Klinghoffer. I want to tell you something about him. He was a gentle and compassionate man. He loved his family. He loved his country. He loved his religion. He embraced life, and he sought virtue. Leon's greatest pleasures were his family and friends. He enjoyed nothing more than to be surrounded by those who he cherished. He was a loving man, and he was loved. Like many of his generation, he learned early in life that the only way to make something of himself was to work hard. He worked selflessly, tirelessly, 90 hours a week, so that his family could have those things which he never had as a child growing up. When he emerged from his second stroke, paralyzed on his right side, he painstakingly relearned to speak. He taught himself how to write with his left hand so that he could feel a sense of purpose, be productive, and useful again. This shows you that he was a fighter in his quiet and very humble manner. Murdered 8 days ago by PLO terrorists, my cousin is now a symbol. We must do more than mourn. We must act. This shy and modest man, catapulted by circumstance and world outrage, would never have visualized himself in the role in which history has cast him. Just as Anne Frank became the symbol of victory over the Nazis, Leon Klinghoffer will become the symbol of victory over the terrorists. Leon Klinghoffer will be a catalyst for a new beginning, for a world without fear, and a world without terror. Thank you.
Good.
Sharon, we appreciate your remarks, and I will call you back.
Thank you.
For a symbol of our feelings. Our next speaker is from the B'nai B'rith Hillel, Robin Kurzer.
On behalf of the B'nai B'rith Hillel Foundation and the delegates of Washington 4 Conference, we'd like to extend our deepest sympathy to the Klinghoffer family. As representatives of hundreds of thousands of Jewish students across the nation, I'm proud to say that we have passed a resolution condemning terrorism. As future leaders, we are proud, and we would like to say that we hope that the world will unite and never again display terrorism as such. And we look forward to the day when there will be a unity and a strength among the nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin Kurzer. With a symbol of our feelings. Final destination on his fatal trip was supposed to have been Israel. And to that end, we hereby deny his murderers their victory by planting trees from the Jewish National Fund in Israel in Leon's memory. Here is your certificate. Please present it to your family.
Thank you for the trees. Hopefully, the planting of these trees in Israel will stand as a reminder that we Americans in this land and we Jews in the world must never ever take our freedom for granted, and that we should bond together in fellowship and in brotherhood to continue our fight for our most precious gift of freedom. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. And from the bottom of my family's heart,
We have with us the President of Holocaust survivors, who will say a word to us, Lee Brewer.
States for an innocent victim, an American citizen, Leo Klinghoffer. 40 years after the brutal killing of 6 million innocent victims, an American citizen became a victim, and we must do all that is in our power to make a stop to brutal killings of innocent people. Thank you.
Before I call upon the Reverend John Steinbruk, I would just like to thank my co-organizers, Dr. Fred Shulman, Dr. David Herman, to express your feelings. I now call upon the Reverend John Steinbruk of Luther Memorial Church to give us the benediction.
The terrorists who took the life of Mr. Leon Klinghoffer may have thought that they had any weaponry that they could use upon this vulnerable and this innocent man. I did not know him personally, but I know the faith tradition from whence he came, and I believe that perhaps this 28th Psalm may well have been the prayer upon his lips. To thee, O Lord, I call. O my rock, be not deaf to my cry, lest if thou answer me with silence, I become like those who go down to the abyss. Hear my cry for mercy when I call to thee for help, when I lift up my hands to thy holy shrine. Do not drag me away with the ungodly, with evildoers, who speak civilly to neighbors with malice in their hearts. Reward them for their works, their evil deeds. Reward them for what their hands have done. Give them their deserts. Because they pay no heed to the works of the Lord, or to what his hands have done, may he tear them down and never build them up. Blessed be the Lord, for he has heard my cry for mercy. The Lord is my strength, my shield. In him my heart trusts. So I am sustained, and my heart leaps for joy, and I praise him with my whole body. The Lord is strength to his people, a safe refuge for his anointed king. O save thy people and bless thy own. Shepherd them and carry them forever. In memory of Leon Klinghoffer, perhaps we can seize this moment in the face of the enemies, those who would destroy freedom, democracy, and all the moral values that we cherish. Let us turn again to our mentor in the source, the book of Isaiah, the 42nd chapter, and called into being. Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I have bestowed my spirit upon him, and he will make justice shine on the nations. He will not call out or lift his voice high, or make himself heard in the open street. He will make justice shine on every race, never faltering, never breaking down. He will plant justice on earth, while coasts and islands wait for his teaching. Thus speaks the Lord, who is God, who created the skies and stretched them out, who fashioned the earth and all that grows in it, who gave breath to his people, the breath of life to all who walk upon it. I, the Lord, have called you with a righteous purpose and taken you by the hand. I have formed you and appointed you to be a light to all peoples, a beacon for the nations, to open eyes that are blind, to bring captives out of prison, out of the dungeons where they lie in darkness. I am the Lord. The Lord is my name. In memory of Leon Klinghoffer, let us never forget the name of the Lord, who calls us to be a light to all peoples. Amen.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming, our distinguished congressmen and senators. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Can we ask a question of Mrs. Herman? Sure. What do you think the discovery of Leon Klinghoffer's body will do to the PLO's claim that he had a heart attack?
Well,
Repeat the question.
help with the answer.
It's a myth, Everyone knew it was a myth.
Right. Clearly, it's
Repeat the question.
Oh, I got it. What do you think the discovery of Leon Klinghoffer's body will do to the PLO claim? Well, obviously, clearly, it's a myth.
We all knew it was a myth.
It was a myth.
We all knew it was a myth. I think everybody knew that it was a myth. It just confirms that which we knew. And it's absurd. And let me say, and this is not a time to get into nuances, etc. I will repeat for the record, we had better begin to deal with a sense of reality and not wishful thinking or hopeful purposes, as noble as they might be, when and where we can count on allies to come forward, or those who we think are allies, under a difficult time. And I'm talking about the Egyptians. If under this situation they acted with such cowardice, why then what happens when we have something where there are judgments involved, where there is something at risk? I think, at least to this senator, I'm not calling for a break in diplomatic relations. I'm not saying to us a suspension of aid, but I am saying let us examine in the light of reality what our relationship really is, as opposed to what we might hope that it had been. How to say that?
Mrs. Hellman, we'll take other questions if you insist on them.